Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Bari Norman, and I'm with Expert Admissions, and I am delighted to welcome you to our webinar this evening with two wonderful guests from two great schools in the South. We are going to be talking about Southern schools, admissions, culture, essays, all the things. So we're happy to have you with us. A couple of housekeeping items while people are queuing into the room. If you have questions, we did receive your questions when you registered, and you'll hear them throughout our conversation this evening. If you have additional questions, please put them in the Q&A box as opposed to the chat. I'll be looking at them and moderating them as we go and do my best to incorporate any of them. And other than that, I think we have people still queuing into the room, but we'll start with introductions and then get right to our conversation. So again, I'm Bari Norman. And first, Molly, if you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're coming from the country. My name is Molly Ingram, and I am one of the regional directors for SMU, or Southern Methodist University, located in Dallas. You will notice by my title slide that I am regionally based in the San Francisco Bay Area, so I do work with students in Northern California, Oregon, and Washington.
Great, thank you, Molly.
My name is Jeannie in a bottle, last name Sullivan. I am one of the regional recruiters with University of Florida. I cover New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and I am in the Northeast. So I'm suffering through this heat wave, as some of us may be in the Northeast as well. So thank you for coming tonight.
Yeah, who knew that when we scheduled this webinar that the whole country basically would be experiencing weather that we typically find more in the South. We're all in it together at this point. So again, welcome to our two guests. When we came up with the idea for this webinar, Southern schools have really just gained a lot of interest but from students from all over. And it's something that we've certainly noticed at Expert Admissions. It's been well documented in the news, and I'm sure you have seen it in your schools as well. And I would love to hear, have you noticed on your end a surge in interest or an increase in interest from students more broadly? Jeannie, we can start with you.
I was like, oh, who's going to start? So especially at UF, we've definitely seen an increase. I think it's one of those things after COVID, especially coming from the Northeast, a lot of people had to be inside during that time. And I felt, or we are seeing, people are loving Florida because the outdoors, you can be outside whenever you want. The weather's typically nice. I mean, Florida did get a little bit of snow this year, which I know people from the Northeast are like, what? But it does happen. But I think also for us, Florida, a lot of people have grandparents that are moving to Florida. So Florida is very familiar for people. Even though, yes, we are not, Gainesville is not where most students are, or most grandparents are moving to. It's still familiar. They have family close by. So we've definitely seen an increase, especially since I've started. We've seen about a 200% increase in Jersey and PA.
Yes, I would say it is a very exciting time for SMU. So many things are new and changing. And I think that has drawn a lot of excitement and reasons why more and more students are choosing to apply. We did join the ACC this past year, so new sports conference, a lot of excitement around that. In fact, Vince Vaughn was actually on our campus today. He stopped by the youth basketball camp. I saw some photos, so you never know who you're going to see on our campus. But also, we did waive our application fee this past year to celebrate joining the ACC. So I think a lot of students that maybe they were on the fence about applying thought, hey, why not? It's a free application. And of course, being in Texas in the middle of the country, one of the great things about Dallas is we're really close to Love Field Airport. Southwest Airlines is the hub for Dallas Love Field, which is about 10 minutes away from our campus. So regardless of where you're coming from in the country, there are a lot of nonstop flights. I don't think it takes more than, 3.5 hours to get anywhere in the country into Dallas. So location is beneficial for a lot of our students.
Makes sense. Thank you. And both Southern schools, but still two very, very different schools, which is precisely why we invited you both today. We want to hear from, two different sort of ends of the spectrum. Can we start out with something somewhat basic but important, which is just to very quickly go over or just list the application deadlines for freshman admission. So if you have early action, if you have early decision, just let students know what the options are. I know UF had recent changes, so just so people are aware of what the current options are.
I'll start. So at UF, this was our first year to move towards early action. So this is a very new process for us, which is also a learning curve for us as well. So for us, we haven't quite finalized all of the deadlines for this upcoming year, but the biggest one to know is early action is November 1st. So that will just be the Common App that is due that day. And then we are going to have test scores November 15th. So we do require the test score and also the SSAR. So where you will self-report your academic record, tell us the grades that you have received. We do not look at transcripts. We use the SSAR. So that is due November 15th. If you want early action, we haven't figured out the deadlines for regular decision yet.
At SMU, we have 2 application deadlines for 4 different application types. So November 1, that is going to be your early action or your early decision. 1 deadline, or if you wait until January 15th to submit your application, you have regular decision as well as early decision 2. Now, most of our students, they are applying early action. I strongly recommend, get your application in by November 1. Enjoy your winter. That way you'll get a decision back from us a lot sooner. You will hear back from us typically right before the winter holidays if you apply early action or early decision. And then, of course, early decision, if you know that SMU is your number 1 choice and it is the best academic, social, financial fit for you, then early decision might be a good application type. There's no, pressure to apply early decision if you're not ready for that, since it is binding, then you would want to do early action.
Great, thank you. And do either of you admit for spring, or do you only admit for fall? And also summer, I should add, because I know that's part of it too. What about for you at SMU, Molly?
Yes. So most of our students, they're applying for fall entry. However, if it's a competitive application year and we don't necessarily have all the space in the room for everyone that we want to admit for fall, it is possible that if a student applied for, say, fall 2025, they could be offered a spring entry term. So if a student, they really want to come to SMU, they don't necessarily get fall entry, spring is a possible pathway for them. So I would say, yes, we do offer that.
And then at UF, you're able to say which one you prefer, either fall or starting during the summer. Summer typically starts right around like 4th of July, which I know is not always ideal for students in the Northeast that are just about to end school right now. So it is kind of a quick turnaround. For us, we have no preference. If you put fall or spring or fall or summer, we will put you where we have the space. So I would say most students do put fall on their application. But due to space, we want to make sure that everyone's not moving in all at once. You may get summer entry. And then there is another pathway or type of program we have towards graduation that does have a spring start, but I'll talk about that a little later on because I don't want to overwhelm with all these spring, summers, and all that.
Thank you. Thank you. And Jeannie, while we have you, you work at a large public university. When I worked in admissions, I worked at a small liberal arts college. So it's hard for me to wrap my brain around how you and your colleagues get everything done. Can you share with us sort of the life cycle of an application in terms of what happens once it's submitted and what happens to it after in terms of your review and evaluation of the application?
Yeah, so being at a larger university, we get a large amount of apps. So this past year, we had a 22% app increase. So we pretty much went from 70,000 to just over 90,000 in 1 year, which is a lot for a large university to happen all at once. With that being said, It's one of those things, being at a larger university, we do get the large apps. So I always tell students, one, you have to realize that I may not be the person reading your common application. So really making sure that you're putting everything on there and don't leave anything unsaid, because you may tell me your life story, but I may not be the person reading it, because we are trying to just work through those applications as effective and efficiently as possible, because we want to make sure that we can get decisions out on time. So anyone can read your application on that front. Once we're towards the end of reading your application, I will go in and we start making recommendations. So I would either say yes to the student or no to that student after, and I go through every school in Jersey and PA. So I do a lot of clicking, a lot of like Excel sheets on that front. And then we move to the next process. And this is really where it's very collaborative in the aspect of it's me, another regional, some people from the office, and then we will really go in and help redefine that, redefine my recommendations. So that's where we start talking about students. We really do the deep dive, because I know my high schools and what schools offer, but also my colleagues may see something different than I will see. And then after that, it kind of goes up the chain in the aspect of then directors start looking at it, start making decisions, and then the higher ups start making decisions, and then release. So a lot of eyes see applications. There's a lot of eyes, there's a lot of hands in the kitchen per se.
But you're not reading geographically in general.
No, and that's because, one, I'm just really good at my job in the aspect of Jersey and PA get some of the most apps. So our top states are New York and Jersey, and then PA is within the top 5. So I always tell students, you don't want me to be looking at over 4,000 students in that aspect. You want me to stay fresh. You want me to stay happy in that aspect.
Great, thank you. And what about at SMU, Molly?
Very similar to the process that Jeannie described. However, we do read geographically. So if a student is applying and they live in Northern California, Oregon, or Washington, I am the person that reads that application. We do, of course, have a collaborative approach. So we are reading with other people, discussing applications with other people. So if you're worried, I'm not the end all to be all. I'm not the only person that's looking at your application. There are other checks and balances in place. But really, I would say, once that application is submitted, obviously make sure you turn in all the required components of your application. We cannot review it if we don't have, your transcript and the important pieces of the application. But we do read them, and we do have committees. So I will meet with other people on campus to discuss before final recommendations are sent up the chain, as Jeannie described.
Molly, does every application go to committee, or are you sort of kind of making decisions on who goes to committee or not?
Some applications we might deliberate on longer if we are uncertain. However, every recommendation is submitted as a batch to review. So yes and no.
Okay. And then another sort of technicality about admission at back to UF, where you're admitted to the university as opposed to particular programs. Can you speak to that, Jeannie? It's similar but a little different at SMU, which we'll talk about in a moment, but just sort of especially for a larger university that offers so much. And also some, we'll talk about business in a bit, some majors that are especially highly subscribed, talk a little bit about the admission process relative to a student's interest in a particular major or area.
Yeah, so when students are applying, they're just applying to UF as a whole. You will put your major that you're interested in on your application. If you get in during orientation, you'll meet with that advisor. So it could be anything. It's just one of those things where we want to be as accessible to our students as possible. So we don't want them to feel like if they don't have a portfolio or they aren't able to submit something, we don't want them to feel like that's holding it against them in that aspect. But also we want to give that flexibility to our students. About 65% of our students change their major at UF, especially being right now in high school, you may be interested in one thing, and then once you start college and take organic chemistry, that may change. I know that changed for me, and I changed my major 5 times. So we just want to give that flexibility for students and really allow you to explore your interest without wondering, how is that going to affect my academic career? And is this going to add more time to my college career?
And if a student is, let's say, interested in business and they know 100% that's what they want and need to study as an undergraduate, can you quickly explain the process for entry to business or accessing business?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about business and engineering because they both pretty much work the same way, and that's, I feel, what a lot of students like to go into. So for both of them, for both business and engineering, you will start in engineering or business, and during those first 2 years, they really just want to make sure that you have a solid foundation. When it comes to business, there are 7 core classes that you have to have a certain grade point or higher. If you have that grade point, then you just move on to the upper division. So I always tell students, they just want to make sure you have that solid foundation, you really understand the material before you move on and add more to your foundation, to your building blocks. Usually engineers get that joke on that front. So I always say, if you can't pass accounting, I don't want you counting my money because I worked really hard for it. Or for engineering, if you can't build a bridge or not passing physics, I don't want you building that bridge that I pass every single day. The only program, at least within engineering, that you do have to reapply in the aspect of an application is our biomedical engineering. And that's just because they want to make sure that you really have that solid foundation. They want to make sure that we're finding those quality students and making sure that we're keeping those classes small. So you just go through the 2 years and then you make sure that you have the right grades, and then you just continue on. No application, no interviews, nothing like that. It's just a checkpoint in your college career.
And then we'll focus on UF for a second, just so it's all together for everybody, and then we'll focus on SMU. For students who are in business or even engineering, I know there are a lot of, UF has done online classes since even before the pandemic. You were way ahead of that trend. Can you talk a little bit about online classes and students in terms of what they should expect with regard to how many or how accessible they are?
Yeah, so there's a few ways that okay, so there's a few different programs. So we have a program called PACE, which is Pathway to Campus Enrollment. That is 2 years online, and then you transition onto campus. May not be a full 2 years if students are taking AP or have those dual enrollment courses. So it's 60 credits. If you're coming in with those credits, it will be shorter than that, but we just say typically 2 years to make it sound prettier on that front. You are able to be in Gainesville. You can still be still go into football games using the rec sports. The only thing that you cannot do is live on campus. So that is a unique program on that front. And then business, those first 2 years, those business classes are online. So I know that is unique for a lot of students. We've been doing that, I believe, since like the late 90s, early 2000s in the aspect. The business program, I'm not one to really hone in about rankings, but I will kind of with this. Our business, all of our business majors are ranked within the top 10 for public universities. So they have seen the benefit of having those online classes for business in the aspect of one, it's taught by the same professor for every single person. So they're all getting the knowledge from the same person, and it's not one of those things where this professor taught it this way and this professor said it this way. We're creating a standard across the board where every student is taught by the same professor. Also, with that being said, most of the classes that are within the College of Business, there are, I believe, only like 3 or 4 in the aspect where in the beginning of the semester, the professor will say, hey, I'm going to teach this class Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 10 p.m. in this building, in this room. No, well, not 10 p.m. I would love that, but some people wouldn't. But that way, students are able to go watch live if you want to, like a traditional classroom. You can watch it live on a video, kind of like what we're doing now, what the professor would be doing, or you can watch the recording. So there's kind of 3 different ways for you to watch the lecture. And this is great for when you're sick, you're not missing class. If you need to go over or you didn't understand something, you're able to go back and reference that. But it provides that flexibility for you to go do that club or hear that guest speaker that's coming from a certain company that you want to work for, or go to that career fair. So it just provides that flexibility, which I know is very different for people in high school where you're so used to structure. But our students really love that because they're really able to connect with campus, recruiters that are on the campus, and being able to find the things that bring them joy outside of the classroom as well. I know that was really long, so I apologize.
We appreciate the thoroughness. And then last question for you, and then I'll give you a break so you can catch your breath. As a public university, you have in-state and out-of-state students. Can you just speak a bit about admit rate for in-state, out-of-state, or anything that might be different for a student coming from out-of-state with regard to how they might best prepare for your admission process?
Yeah, so for us, we don't have a preference for in-state or out-of-state. It just happens to be that most of our students are in-state. I always put it in the reference of we are the flagship review of Florida, so everyone wants to apply to Florida in that aspect. Not that many people from Jersey or Wyoming want to come to UF, so that's why we may not have as many out-of-state students. Right now, we are right around 22, 23% out of state. So it is something that we are trying to grow and maintain. We have all 50 states represented, but in the grand scheme of things, there is no preference, there is no difference. Everyone is reviewed the same way in the aspect of the admissions process. And we really just look at students based on their high school and their high school alone. So we're not going to compare them to another school in the area or in another state because what their high school offers or doesn't offer, we don't want to hold that against them. So we're really just looking at students from that high school when we are doing that review process.
Great, thank you. I'm going to give you a break. All right, Molly, I'd love to turn our attention to SMU, where business is also super hot and a big area of interest. Can you speak a little bit about the Cox School business and how your admissions process works with regard to entry to Cox and also to Meadows, where auditions may be required, and share a little bit about that.
Yeah, if I had $1 for every time someone came up to my table at a college fair and asked me about Cox, I could retire now. It is just that popular. But it's an amazing program, as is Meadows. They do differ in the sense that there is a separate review process. So for Meadows, depending on if a student is applying to a program in our art school that requires an audition or a portfolio, then that is something that is reviewed by the Meadows School directly. But essentially, any student that's applying to SMU for undergraduate admission, their application is read by our office first. If it's a yes from the Office of Undergraduate Admission for the Cox School of Business, for example, then that application is passed on to the business schools team. They do their own review. So essentially, students are going to get 2 decision letters if they are applying to Cox. The first one is going to come from our office, and then a few weeks later, after Cox has had the chance to review all of those applications, then a student will get their Cox decision letter. A few things to keep in mind. Now, if a student wants to be reviewed for Cox, they have to apply and put that as their first choice major on the application. A lot of students, if they don't know that, or they think they can game the system and say, oh, I'm going to apply for English, and then I'm going to commit to SMU, and then say, oh, you know what, now I'm going to join the Cox School Business. No, if it was that easy, everyone would do it. So they do have to enter directly. It is a direct entry program. Because so many students want to be in it, that is one of the reasons why it's competitive, is just because we want to maintain the size and integrity of the program to make sure that students have those small class sizes and are able to graduate in 4 years. So basically, apply to SMU, make sure that you say Cox, one of the majors, is your first choice selection, and then they will review your application. Now, if a student is admitted to SMU, it's a yes from our office, but it's a no from Cox. Their decision letter will give them a list of alternative majors that are very business adjacent at SMU. One of the things that I find slightly concerning about today's generation is that I feel like business is the new undecided. So many students come up and they say, I want to major in business, and I'll say, why? Do you just want to make money? Why are you interested in business? Because if it's money that they're after, there are many ways that they can go on to have successful careers, regardless of whether it's business or not. And oftentimes it's helpful having a conversation with students to figure out what exactly it is that they're interested in. There have been times where students, they think that they want to be in Cox, but then after chatting with them and the work that lots of counselors do, of course, that you all do, maybe, maybe it's corporate communication, and that's actually in the Meadows School. So depending on a student's interest, Cox may or may not be the best fit for them. I mentioned earlier that we have early decision. It is a binding application. So if a student is applying early decision and they want to go to SMU for Cox and nothing else, if they're admitted to SMU but rejected from Cox, they are still bound to come to SMU. So I always like to say Cox should be kind of the cherry on top of their SMU experience. If they love what the university has to offer and they're also interested in Cox, but they'd be open to majoring in something else, then that is totally fine. Apply early decision. But if they do not get into Cox, the internal transfer process, it is competitive just because there are limited spaces since it is based on essentially attrition. So hopefully I answered the question for that. Basically, apply to SMU, put Cox majors as your first choice. There isn't a separate application for the first year entry. However, if they do come to SMU and they are trying to transfer in through that internal transfer process, then they would have to fill out a separate application. Also, Cox always recommends, don't come to SMU with the only sole intention of getting into the internal transfer process. You really should love the university, regardless of just this one program. And I think there are a lot of amazing programs that many of our students do, and they go on to have business careers. The CEO and founder of the dating app Bumble, for instance, she did not major in the Cox School of Business. She did not have a business major, and yet that's an example of a non-Cox SMU alum who went on to a successful business career. I very briefly touched on Meadows. I would say really just the differences, portfolio, audition. If I see when I'm reading an application that a student is auditioning, I usually will just take a quick glance and make sure that they've set up their audition with Meadows to make sure that that's all on track. So I would say it's a little bit different in the sense that there's extra paperwork and supplementals compared to Cox. And I would also say, again, the same thing for early decision. If you only want to come to SMU to be a dancer, maybe don't apply early decision, be open to other majors.
Thank you. That's super helpful. One follow-up question. It's clear certainly students should not anticipate that internal transfer process working for them. Do you know about either how many or what percentage of students who try for that internal transfer, like how many students per year are successful in doing that?
Not exactly, just because it really does fluctuate based on how many spaces they have available. I do know that, it is more competitive just because there are fewer spaces than just a regular incoming class. I will also say anyone at SMU, regardless of major, if they don't get into Cox, they can minor in business. So that's always a really great option. And then I would also strongly recommend that students that want finance but don't get finance look into economics with finance applications. If you talk to the interim dean in Dedman College, he will argue that it's amazing, if not better, than majoring in finance because it is very interdisciplinary. Cox is amazing, but so are all the other programs that our students go on to have business careers with.
Thank you. And then one last question about it. If a student just wants to take like a course, a business course, no interest in minoring even, can students do like a one-off, or are Cox courses only available to minors or majors?
Very popular answer. It depends. So it depends on the
Everything
course.
in college admissions. It depends.
Yes. There are definitely courses. Some might be major restricted based on the level. But if, a student wants to take a business class here or there, but they don't necessarily want to get that minor, they definitely have the option to do so. And then I guess one thing I didn't mention, regardless of business or Meadows, a student's acceptance letter coming from SMU, it doesn't say, congratulations, Jeannie, you were admitted for English, it says you were admitted to SMU. So as long as a student is interested in something that doesn't require that direct entry process, they can change their major. They just really need to send their admission counselor an email and say, hey, I'm thinking of this now, but we don't necessarily admit by major. We're just admitting to SMU with the exception of those programs.
Got it. Thank you so much. And we'll start with Jeannie this time because now I'll give Molly a chance to to take a breath. Switching gears a little bit. So for students who are rising seniors, for counselors who are out there, we're already in essay and application mode. And everyone is certainly wondering if you know yet if you'll be keeping your supplemental essay questions for next year, and if you don't, when you might know. So if we could start with Jeannie and UF, if you're keeping that most meaningful activity question.
Yeah, so I asked earlier today, and it looks like we're keeping it. So we have the one main essay that everyone will hopefully or most likely use for a lot of the universities, and then we have the supplemental, what is the most meaningful activity outside the classroom. My biggest tip, which I will kind of lead with that, in the aspect of your most meaningful activity outside the classroom should not be the same thing as your essay. Really, we want to get to know you as a student. We want to understand all the facets of you. So if you want to talk about one thing, keep it for just that section. Don't use it for both, because this is really your one time to shine. And you don't have to keep telling us all about soccer or all about this one activity. Really show the different facets of who you are as a student, because we just want to get to know you. And that's really the only way for you to shine during the application process.
And what about at SMU? Do you have that info yet, Molly?
I don't believe that it should be changing. We'll know more probably in August, but as it currently stands, that YSMU, I always call it the YSMU optional supplemental. It is optional, but it cannot hurt a student to write it. I think it's a really great opportunity for students to show why this specific university. I wholeheartedly agree with Jeannie. Please don't just tell us about soccer. I have no hatred against soccer, but we want to see different components of a student's application. I always find it really refreshing when the essay, so not the supplemental, but kind of the personal statement, if a student's activity resume says, you know, soccer this, soccer that, soccer, 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 the personal statement is going to be about something that's not soccer, because then I learn more about you as a student. So definitely love to see variety in the application.
Sure. And on the topic of essay, what is the role of the essay or essays, Common App versus supplemental questions at each school? And Jeannie, maybe we can start with you. Again, especially at a place so big where you're reading so many applications, could you share with us a little bit about the role of the essay?
Yeah, so to give it context, so people understand the role, but also kind of how important the essay is. I read about 50 applications a day. So imagine doing that every single day. That's like 250 a day or a week. I can't do 250 in a day. Really, as I discussed earlier, the essay is really just to show another side of you. I always tell my students, you have to be your biggest hype man. This is where you're going to brag about yourself, just as a whole during the application process. For us, because we're not looking for a certain major or certain programming, we really just want to understand what makes you think, what drives you, what are some challenges that you've overcome, and really paint the picture. Make sure that whatever you start with, you also kind of bring it back. And how did you grow from it? How did it challenge you? What are the outcomes? Or really think about what you want that reader to learn about you during that essay piece of it. And I also tell students, think outside of the box. We read a lot of essays that are very similar in that aspect of like a sports injury or a death in the family, which, yes, they are bad things and it happens. You also have to realize, if I'm reading 1,400 essays in 6 weeks, how many of those are probably going to have a similar story in that aspect. So it's okay to think outside of the box. At least for UF, we like it when students think outside of the box. It doesn't have to be your traditional essay. I can tell you I've read some of the weirdest essay topics in my career, but those are the ones that I remember the most. So have fun with the essay.
And then what about you, Molly?
Yeah, I agree with Jeannie. no hatred to the sports injury essay, but there are a lot of them. That's not to say that I won't recommend to admit someone that's written one, because again, it's just one piece of the entire puzzle, because we do holistic reviews. So the essay isn't going to necessarily make or break a student's decision, but it's giving us more context about that student. Does SMU seem like a good fit for them? Are they going to thrive in our environment? What are we learning about the student? Is it well written? Do we learn something about your personality? Those are the things we're looking for. Some of my favorite essays that I've read, they weren't about anything, spectacular. It's not the most amazing topic. I think students get bogged down in worrying about finding the perfect topic. But if I feel like I've gotten to know something about you and it's memorable, they can be the most mundane topics that students sometimes don't even think is worthy of writing their essay about. And also remember, we're human. We're reading, 50 to 80 essays a day, but we do read them. And depending on, how memorable your essay is, I might mention it in your acceptance letter. I have been known to do that because I love reading the essays. It's one of my favorite parts of the review process.
Yeah, I often say, it's students will also often get very focused on what's my topic. And to me, everyone's topic actually is the same. It's you. You're the topic. It's the topic isn't the vehicle or the vessel through which we learn about you. The topic is you, and how you choose to tell us about that person is sort of, neither here nor there. It'll be what it will be. And it's something that's said so often about just being yourself, because people are looking for, like, what do I need to say to get in? What do I need to do? And it's frustrating for students to hear just be yourself, because they don't often believe that that's good enough, or what's so interesting or what's so unusual that's happened to me. And to your point, Molly, is that, it doesn't have to be something no one's ever heard of before. Oh my God, this kid did this, right? Like, or it doesn't have to be super gimmicky. It just has to have meaning to you. And when you do read so many essays, you can tell who's BSing and who's sort of forcing, and who's kind of telling you something that they actually care about. And so I think sometimes, like you said, the most mundane things really show you so much and tell you so much about a person. But students need to hear that more. So I appreciate both of you sharing that. It's just be yourself, whether you're super quirky, whether you're not, whatever it is, don't try to force it. And remember that the essay ultimately is about you, not about the vacation or the club or the whatever. And then you get more interesting students to learn about when they come across your desks. It's a nice segue actually into AI, which obviously has, I just feel like by the week, we hear about it more and more. Two questions surrounding that. The first is how each of your offices is using AI at this point. If you could share that with us. And Molly, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, so I was just on campus last week in Dallas, and we haven't officially released our statement on AI for the upcoming application cycle. But for students, if you are applying for fall 2026, we will have an official statement on the website right around the time that our application launches. I would say we have people in the office, they love AI to, write internal emails to one another. I'm very old-fashioned. I always say I can write an email faster than AI can do it the way that I want it to be done. So you won't really find me using it. However, I can always tell when a student has used it for their essays, because one of the dead giveaways with SMU in the supplemental, they will say, I want to attend Southern Methodist University, parentheses, SMU, because blah, blah, blah. No one says Southern Methodist University, parentheses, SMU, quite like ChatGPT does. And also, if you are using AI to write your essays, especially a supplemental that's about the university, there's key phrases that the AI is going to pull from our website. And so then every student sounds exactly the same, because it's talking about our strategic plan, it's talking about the university's mission, it's talking about how beautiful our campus is. And I know all of those things, but what I'm not getting from that answer is something about the student. So I would say, there's ChatGPT, AI, it's not a bad thing, but if we're not learning anything about you, if it's not authentically you as an applicant, then it's not helping your case.
We did a little project in our office and asked ChatGPT for 3 different essays for 3 different schools. And shockingly, 2 of the 3 essays said the same thing, even though they were 2 totally different schools. And one, it was very, sort of technical about the school. The other one, it was just about another school. It didn't even make any sense. So you have to be, I think students need to be aware that you really have to be careful, certainly, with it. And does your office use it at all for reviewing applications or screening applications in any way?
We are reading them. So like I said, I take pretty thorough notes. So the applications that I read, I love having notes on what a student's essay is about. So that way, if you do email me, I remember and I say, oh my gosh, I remember Jeannie's essay about planting bamboo in the backyard with her grandfather. Those are things that I like to remember. So not really. No, you might see it in communications, like mass emails that you're getting from universities. I think that's very popular. And obviously, if it is a mass communication, it's not being sent to you by me personally. But if you, the student, do reply to that email, it is me, Molly, a real person, replying to you. So I would say probably, marketing campaigns,
Sure.
those emails are helped with AI.
Thank you. And Jeannie, what about at UF?
Yeah, so at UF, we don't use AI at all during the admissions process. So we are the ones reading, clicking, evaluating students, really making sure that we're having that personal touch. And that's just because one of the things is high schools change each year and what they offer or don't offer, if they're getting rid of APs or dual enrollments. I know that ChatGPT doesn't always know that. I also tell students, as Molly said, using how it pulls certain things or certain phrasing from the website. You, as a high school student, shouldn't know what a strategic plan is. We know that you use ChatGPT for that. There's ways to use it in a smart way. And I always tell students, I was telling a student last week, where on your Common App, you only get 150 characters to talk about a club and activity. When you're typing it out, you may have 400. Maybe using ChatGPT to figure out, putting that in and be like, how can I make this more concise, and how can I make my messaging still go through in 150 characters. You can be smart with how you use it, but don't use it to write your big essays, the big things that really show your personality. Use it as a tool, but not as a supplement to make you successful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And now switching a bit to culture, because we did at the beginning say we're talking about Southern schools. We'll start with SMU. So, students will sometimes have strong opinions about, or parents will have strong opinions about Texas, and they may feel, just sort of take Texas as a whole. They may say Texas, but we're willing to look at this or this. Can you talk a little bit about SMU relative to its roots in Texas, and a bit about Dallas so people can have a better understanding?
Yeah. And keep in mind, my experience with Dallas and SMU is very much from a California mindset, since I am regionally based in the Bay Area. So born and raised, pretty much lived in California my entire life. I had never been to Texas until I traveled there for work. And being a Californian, you have those misconceptions about Texas. You see Sandy Cheeks in a SpongeBob episode and you think, oh, it's pecan pie and 10-gallon hats. Very stereotypical, but Dallas is very, very different from Texas as a whole. I would say, one, because it is one of the largest cities in the country. So Dallas is the 9th largest city in the nation, 3rd largest in Texas. So it's definitely not rural by any means. But then I also love that SMU, I call it the SMU bubble. You have the big city. You can literally see the downtown Dallas skyline above my head. If you're on the 4th floor of Dallas Hall on our campus, you can see that out in the beyond. When our campus was built, they built it on top of a hill, hence why we call it the hilltop. And that is your future, looking out beyond, whether you choose to stay in Dallas or return to wherever home is for you. Downtown Dallas has a lot of great opportunities for our students. But getting back to the SMU bubble, if you never leave SMU's campus, there are plenty of things to do. We have so many different diverse clubs and cultural centers. So there's a lot of things that make students feel at home. They can find their belonging. But if they want to explore and venture out beyond the SMU bubble and they want to get off campus, downtown's only about 3 miles away. And Dallas has about 20 different neighborhoods. So very similar to how, there's no one idea or conception of what New York is. You have so many different parts of New York, parts of the Bay Area in San Francisco. I think Dallas is very similar in that way. There is no one Dallas. I would say another thing that a lot of students are drawn to for SMU, we're a very welcoming campus. I think just Southern schools in general, one of the biggest culture shocks for me as a Californian going to SMU, people are very, very friendly. I thought I was a friendly person, and then I came to SMU and I'm like, wow,
Little
like
did
I
you
need to
know,
be,
Holly.
yes, I need to be nicer. People open doors for you. It is the cultural way. If someone doesn't open a door for me, it's like an affront, And so people are very, very friendly, very welcoming. I love the fact that, our students, they're very respectful of one another. So it's kind of not to delve too deep into politics, but I'm sure many of you were thinking that when there were encampments throughout the country, SMU did not have encampments. Our students, regardless of their political beliefs, religious beliefs, they are very respectful to one another. And so I think the fact that our students are able to peaceably coexist on our campus, it is very much the SMU way. And then, of course, in terms of other diversity things that we're really proud of, Dallas is the largest contiguous arts district in the nation. So we have a lot of, really eclectic artists and art communities. I also think another big misconception about Texas is that it is not one of the most inclusive places, but SMU is in Dallas. Dallas is not Texas. And Dallas is actually the 6th largest LGBTQ population in the country. One of those 20 neighborhoods in Dallas, Oak Lawn, aka the Gayborhood. It was named the best gay neighborhood by Out Magazine, and it does have one of the most famous rodeo gay saloons in the country, if not the world. So I think regardless of where a student is coming from, they can find belonging in Dallas. They can definitely find it at SMU. And we've got, all of our different centers on campus. So I've never felt unwelcome. And yes, I know I'm coming from a point of privilege as a cis white woman, but I really do think that our students and our faculty and staff, they really do care about welcoming people from all over the country.
Thank you. Can I ask you a different question that's a little bit related to culture? Is the name of your school is Southern Methodist University. That gets people a little scared sometimes too. I always say just say SMU and just, kind of get, but can you share a bit, how much does that Methodist piece play a role on campus for students?
Yeah. So yes, you will see in most of our marketing pieces, you will not see Southern Methodist University spelled out. You will see SMU. Part of the reason is because while we were founded by the Methodist Church, we are non-sectarian in our teaching. So if a student comes to SMU, we don't care if they are praising Jesus or nothing at all, regardless of what their religious beliefs are. We don't have religion class requirements. They don't have to go to chapel, although we do have a chapel on campus should they choose to check it out. But we like to say kind of that it is our middle name. It can be as big, as little, or as non-existent in a student's experience. I think a lot of students don't realize, which I love because I majored in history and I love reading about the, university's background. A lot of people don't know that, Vanderbilt or USC in the Southern California area, they were founded by the Methodist Church, but because it's not in the name of the university, people don't necessarily affiliate them. So I always tell students, don't let the Methodist scare you away. You don't have to be Southern, you don't have to be Methodist to come to SMU. But I think the Methodist part that you will see is that it is a very welcoming environment because that is the Methodist way. But most of our students are not Methodist. If you do look at religious statistical breakdowns, Catholic tends to be higher, Protestant, Jewish. We have about 1% Buddhist population. But yes, we have students of all religious backgrounds.
Thank you. Jeannie, can I ask you a question a bit, particular to state universities and asking more particularly about UF, which is how much control does the state government or politicians have on the admissions process? What's their role in that?
Yeah, so I always tell families they don't have control. They provide guidance, but that guidance is typically in the aspect of they want us to increase our out-of-state population. So that's been a big initiative for us the last few years. When I first started, we were only about 18% out of state. This year, we're right around 22, and there's already talks to increase it to be a little higher. So they don't control anything in that aspect. I tell people they don't have any say in how we review or how we admit students. They don't say, oh, we have to look for this certain thing in that process. They just provide a little bit of guidance, but they're everyone always worries about it, but it's not something that they dictate or control during that admissions process. It's really us, the employees, the admission staff, that really guide that process and how we admit our students.
Thank you. It sounds much like state universities in general, the way either Board of Regents or the legislature or whatever. Okay, thank you. And then a question actually is a follow-up to that. Speaking of in-state, out-of-state, where do you, aside from Florida, where do you draw from most next?
Yeah, so I always tell my students we have a very strong Northeast presence on campus. So much so that an article came out saying that Florida has more Wawas than Jersey. So if you don't know what Wawa is, it's like a gas station, like a 7-Eleven with gas, or I don't know. I'm not a Wawa fan, so I don't understand. So Jersey and New York are very much our top two on that front. Texas definitely got up there this year. And like the DMV, so DC, Maryland, Virginia, on that front. So we're a little bit of everywhere. We have all 50 states represented. It's just most of our students are typically coming from the Northeast.
And Molly, for you, where does SMU primarily draw from? Is it from Texas or?
It's not. And so I think that's another thing, again, when people have those fears or concerns or misconceptions about Texas, which Texans are amazing people, so definitely meet them. But most of our students are actually coming from outside of Texas than from Texas. So about 42% are Texans, 3% are international, and 55% are coming from out of state. Most of those are coming from, of course, California, Florida, New York, Illinois, and Georgia in that order. So in terms of where we have a strong regional presence, I do have a colleague in Florida. I do have a colleague in Southern California. In fact, he has worked for the University regionally for over 33 years, the amazing Mr. Rick Diaz. So definitely really strong interest in those two regions, as well as, of course, the New York area. And then I am the first regional in Northern California that SMU has had. So we're seeing more interest from Northern California.
And Jeannie, a quick question for you as a state institution where obviously you draw mostly from Florida. For students who are coming from outside of Florida, since they're a nice sized population and growing, is there an out-of-state community? How do students feel kind of coming onto campus as out-of-state students?
Yeah, so for us, we have a 97% freshman retention rate. So it's one of the highest of the nation. So a lot is attributed to that. Our students are able to find their community, find their people, but also find those opportunities. We have a resident hall that is dedicated to our out-of-state students. So you are able to be around other out-of-state students if you want to. You are not tied down to it. But as I was an out-of-state student, you kind of go through highs and lows of homesickness. So it's nice to be around other students that are kind of going through that at the same time on that front. So there's that. Also, when you sign up for for classes during orientation, we have this thing called First Florida, which is like it's a class that freshmen are able to take, and it really just talks about like the resources on campus and where to find them. Really just get used to University of Florida just to make sure that you are successful. There are a few out-of-state classes. So if you just want to be with out-of-state students, you're able to do that. Being the South, Greek life is a thing for us. So sometimes our students will do Greek life. For us, only about 20% of our students do Greek life. So I don't want you to think it rules our campus or it's only Greek life. It's not the case, only 20%. So our students are able to find that. But we also have over 1,000 clubs, student organizations. So there's a little bit of everything for our students. I don't like to sugarcoat. It's the New Yorker in me. I may live in Buffalo, but I swear I was a New York taxi driver in my past life with how I drive. But I'm also very honest and transparent in that aspect where if you're not putting yourself out there, you're not going to get the most out of your college experience. Being able to join the clubs and do all the things, as long as you're doing that, you will be successful. But if you're not, you have to be realistic with how your college experience is going to be.
Absolutely. No matter where you're going. You gotta put yourself out there, as you said, have to go after the experiences and make the most of them. I'd love to do a very quick lightning round with just a few questions that folks may be thinking about. What are your recommendations or thoughts on including an additional resume? So a resume in addition to what students are filling out in the activities section on the Common App. Molly?
I don't think it's necessary as long as they're filling out the activities resume properly. Oftentimes I will see a student attach it and it's the same exact thing. If it's the same thing, that's just going to slow me down when I'm reading and I'll say, cool, I already read this. I would say unless it is new information that they cannot fit in the activities resume section for whatever reason, then sure, you can submit it. But you should be putting all of your information in the activities resume section of the Common App.
At UF, we don't look at anything outside of the Common App. So if it's not in the Common App, we're not looking at anything. So really make sure you're putting everything there. Don't leave anything unsaid. And that's just because there's a lot of hands in the kitchen. So we want to make sure that we're reviewing everything during that file. So nothing. We don't look at anything that's outside of the Common App.
Thank you. And what about the optional ACT science section? Optional for you, required, recommended? Molly, what is it at SMU?
We are currently test optional for all of the portions, so a student does not have to submit a test score. In fact, about half of our students do not. If a student for some reason submitted a test score and then changed their mind, just send your admission counselor an email saying, no, I do not want to use test scores. Typically, students are going to be looking at the average class profile and looking at those scores when determining whether they want to submit their own scores or not. We will have an official answer about the science portion when our application opens, but for super scoring, it has to be the same application type. So in theory, if a student wanted to super score with a science ACT and a non-science, they have to match.
So if a student took the ACT with science one time and then without another, those two dates cannot be super scored at SMU. It would have to be 2 dates either with or 2 dates without the science.
Yes,
Okay.
so easiest thing to do, just don't submit test scores if you don't have to, unless you're really, really proud of them. It's not going to hurt a student if they do not submit test scores.
And what about at UF, Jeannie?
At UF, we require test scores. So there is no ifs, ands, or buts. You can't get around it. We don't require, or we will not be requiring it. But I will say if there happens to be anyone from the state of Florida with us today, if you are trying to go for a certain scholarship, the Bright Futures, you are required to take the science piece. So if you are thinking about trying to go for Bright Futures, you need that science piece. For anyone else, if you're not in Florida, which I don't know, but I want to cover my bases, you don't need the science piece on that front.
And last very quick question, and then I have a final question for each of you. Are there any new majors or programs, just very quickly, list-wise? You can say it just if there's anything worth mentioning or noting today.
I can start.
Yeah.
So for us, two of the ones that we just implemented this past year is brain science. So really great for anyone that's thinking like clinical psychology, not neuroscience, but very much that clinical psychology side of things. And we also just added meteorology for our undergrad. We used to just have it for grad, but we added it for our undergrad, so that is within the J school or journalism, as we like to say.
Not so much new majors, but we did gain R1 status this year. So we are now a R1 university, which is super exciting. And then, of course, if not so much that students necessarily care, but counselors, we do have a new university president. So Dr. Jay Hartzell, he is coming to us from UT Austin. He is new on our campus, and he did take over for our former president, Dr. Turner, who was with SMU for over 30 years.
Thank you. And then final question for each of you. I always like to end these by putting your own school's essay questions to you. And so, Jeannie, I would love for you, I'm going to read it for our audience in case they're not familiar, but UF has one supplemental question, and it is, please provide more details on your most meaningful commitment outside of the classroom while in high school, and explain why it was meaningful. This could be related to an extracurricular activity, work, volunteering, an academic activity, family responsibility, or any other non-classroom activity for a max of 250 words. By the way, what a well-written supplemental question, clearly giving direction after getting many essays that didn't answer what you wanted. But thank you for that, giving them direction. So if you were answering that and you were applying today, how would you answer? What would be your most meaningful activity?
Yeah, so for me, I would say photography, because one, it's a hobby, so it's really hard to put that into your activities on that front. But I feel for me, I would explain how photography can be interpreted in different ways, very much like the college experience, but it provides an outlet, because there is art is subjective, on that front, and there is no right or wrong way to do it. So using photography as an outlet, being able to use a different side of my brain as someone who is very science focused, and I played a lot of sports in high school, where photography allowed me to be free, and there were no borders on that front, and really just expand what I'm thinking about and think outside of the box on that front.
Great, thank you so much. And Molly, SMU's question also at 250 words. They have two. I'm going to ask you one of them. The one that you mentioned earlier, you referred to kind of the why SMU, which is SMU appeals to students for a variety of reasons. Briefly describe why you are interested in attending SMU and what specific factors have led you to apply. How might you answer that?
Yeah, I would say, and I always find this question I look at more carefully than our other supplemental because it is very specific to the university. So if a student is writing it, it should be specific to SMU and specific to that student in relation. Please, for the love of God, don't tell me why you want to go to TCU or Vanderbilt. Don't just do a copy and paste answer that's generic to universities in general. What is your connection to SMU? And I don't mean that in a legacy way. I mean that in how have you connected to the university? Did you come on a tour and you absolutely fell in love with, Dallas Hall, and you didn't step on the seal because you want to graduate in 4 years? Or you went to a football game and you learned about boulevarding with a friend? Or maybe you've never been to our campus, but you took the virtual tour and you just fell in love with what you learned about the university. Maybe it's a professor and an academic program that you're interested in, or maybe you've never experienced, Texas before, but you've always had this notion of going to university out of state. Really, it should be something that's specific to SMU in relation to you. And we want to admit students that want to come to SMU. It is a two-sided process. We're looking for students that are going to be a good fit for us, and you were looking for a university that's going to be a good fit for you.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you for spending part of your evening with us and for sharing some super helpful information. Thank you to everybody for joining us, and to everybody, have a great night.